this will objectively, statistically increase your probability of getting the legendary item that you want. So you started playing Diablo, you probably saw somebody's build, you saw a bunch of legendary items that you want, and now you're frustrated because you've been playing for 10, 15, 20, 30 hours, and you still have yet to get the aspect you want. Maybe you haven't got the Shockwave Pulverize aspect you want. Maybe you haven't got a unique you want, etc. Let's talk about how exactly do we target farm specific legendary items. Now, to be brutally transparent, in the beginning of this video, there is no way in the game to guarantee that you get the exact aspect you want. But there is ways to increase the odds of getting the specific legendary aspects that you want. First, you need to understand how aspects actually work and that there's brackets associated with them. For instance, if you actually look at the way aspects work, there is allowed item types. You can also see this within the Codex of Power if you look as well. There's defensive, offensive, resource, utility, and mobility. And each of these types of aspects are only placeable on certain types of items. For instance, the offensive aspects here can only go on one-handed, two-handed gloves, amulets, and rings. This also applies to the way aspects work within items. So let's say I have a pair of boots. I can't put the offensive aspect on the pair of boots. You cannot imprint this aspect on this type of item. That is because this right here is one-handed, two-handed, etc. only, whereas the utility works for the helm, chest, armor, boots, gloves, and amulets. Now, this is crucially important. You're going to notice some of these double dip. The gloves and amulet, for instance, are on both the utility list as well as our offensive aspect list, for instance. And the rings are alone by themselves for resources. So how do we actually take this newly acquired information and translate it into acquiring the legendary aspect that you are trying to target farm? When you're in the wild, drops will stay within their brackets. So follow with me. If I drop a legendary ring item, I know that legendary ring item that's on the ground I'm about to pick up is either going to have an offensive aspect because rings are on the list. It will not have a utility aspect as there is no rings on the utility aspect list, and it might have a resource aspect on the list. So when I pick this ring up, if I'm looking for only the resource aspect, I might think this could be a really good opportunity for me to get the resource aspect I am looking for. Now, the same thing is true of things like legendary weapons, etc. When a two-handed drops and I look at it, I know, okay, well, this two-handed weapon, for instance, is going to have an offensive aspect on it because that is the only thing that two-handed weapons can have. It cannot have any other type of two-handed weapon. So we start to realize certain items can only have certain aspects for your class. It's crucially to understand that certain aspects are tied to certain items and that cannot be on other types of items. And it's also crucially important that some items double dip. For instance, when you see gloves that drop in the wild, the gloves that drop are going to have a very high chance of having all kinds of different aspects. It will be harder to actually acquire these because it can have offensive, it can have the utility, and what have you. There's a lot of different options that can go on gloves. So we had to explain that concept before we got into how to use this knowledge to make sure you increase the percentage chance of you getting the aspect you want. So now let's get to that portion. There are actually multiple ways to use this to our advantage. I'm going to start with the most obvious, easiest one and go to the more complicated ones as we get going, okay? So you can understand the concept. Let's say that we want the pulverize shockwave aspect. Well, this pulverize aspect is an offensive aspect. It increases our damage. So we know because it's an offensive aspect, it can only show up on one-handed, two-handed, gloves, amulets, and rings. So if I was going to do, let's say, the gambler here, if I chose to be like, oh, it's an offensive, okay, I need a glove also. Well, let me just buy some gloves right now until I get it. I'm actually having a lower percentage chance of getting the pulverize because other items or other aspects can show up on the gloves. So what I would actually want to do instead is target farm a one-handed weapon, as it is the cheapest gamble, and it's also not sharing any of the other aspects brackets. It cannot have a utility aspect. It cannot have a resource aspect. It can only have the offensive. So it is statistically a higher chance that when I buy one-handed maces, I will receive the pulverized one. For instance, here is an almost near perfect row of the actual Earth Skills one, which is another damage aspect, very important for my build. So for this reason, when you're gambling in things like the trader, you want to make sure that you are targeting the item that is only within the aspect you are attempting to acquire, but this is not the only way that this applies. After you beat the campaign, you will unlock something called the Tree of Whispers. What the Tree of Whispers will tell you to do is go around the map and do these different little objectives. Like, for instance, do this dungeon. You'll get 5 of the Grim Favors. Once you have 10 Grim Favors, come back to the tree. When you turn in the Grim Favors, there is actually an option for you to pick between 3 different caches, and those 3 different caches will be exactly like the Gambos. It will tell you either amulet, ring, one-handed, etc. If you're trying to get an offensive aspect, pick that one. If you're trying to get a ring, the ring are the easiest to target farm because rings they're the only one that can have the resource allocation, okay? So if you're trying to get a resource generation one, that's obvious there. But if you're trying to get the offensive aspect, you're going to pick some kind of weapon, amulet, ring, etc. But preferably a weapon, as that's the easiest way to get an offensive aspect. Now, if you're going to farm the Tree of Whispers, something I highly recommend is looking for the dungeons that actually have these little chest icons like this that tell you for a reward for first completion. Rewards for first completion will give you the Codex of Power. So if there's a specific legendary you want, this is the only way you can guarantee it if it's in the Codex of Power. So let's just say the one I really wanted was the basic skill with the core skill. I can actually go here and be like, oh, this one's in the Codex of Power, and I can click on the ones I don't have. For instance, Critical Strikes with Shred. I can click on it, and it will leave a pin on the map, and then I can actually see right where that dungeon is. Now, if you notice, there's the chest. Now, I would try to do this with the aspects that I don't have yet, so that way it's a fresh dungeon, so not only will I get the renown from clearing the fresh dungeon, you want to clear the renown because you get Paragon points for it, but then also you'll get the aspect, and you'll also, if it has a mark, much like these red ones here, you'll also get the Grim Favors. So you'll be double dipping multiple ways to get legendary aspects. There's also Helltide farming. Helltide farming will show up randomly on the map. You can teleport to it. What happens when you do Helltide farming is it will allow you to be able to specifically target farm, just like the Tree of Whispers or just like the Obos, target farm exact items. You can get cinders and then take those cinders and turn them into chests that are scattered throughout the Helltide map in order to get an item of the exact specification that is located on that chest. It was, for instance, it would say heavy armor, two-handed weapon, what have you. I have all of these different labels so you know what kind of aspect you're getting yourself into. And just to double down to reiterate, it is crucially important that you check the aspects of the Codex of Power here and make sure that there is none of the aspects that you actually want are on the list. As you can see, there are very many. You can just see my own class here. There's very many of the aspects, and a lot of these are crucial even to like the in-game build I am using that can be found straight up on the map. Just keep in mind that these aspects themselves are the minimum row for said aspect, whereas the ones that you will find in the wild have the potential of having a much better row. For instance, you see this one goes 60 to 80% critical strike damage. If this was from Codex, it would be 60, which is the minimum. I found it in the wild. It rode maximum, which is 80%. So it is 30% or 33.333% or whatever you want to call it. Repeating, of course, meme from Leroy here. Increase of efficiency. So for that reason, farming in the overworld, farming the Helltides, farming the Tree of Whispers, farming the Obos, trying to get the legendary aspect you need that way, even though, yes, it is going to be annoying and take you forever. And yes, I'm sorry, there is no exact way to get the exact aspect you want in this game. That's something we're all struggling with. And yes, if you're having problems getting things like the pulverized aspect, for instance, if for Shockwave, it does seem like some of these legendary aspects seem to be more rare than others for whatever reason, so you're not alone. But this will objectively, statistically increase your probability of getting the legendary item that you want. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing to this channel, or coming by the live stream at twitch.tv/DarthMicrotransaction, where we are part of the official Diablo partner program and Twitch drops, and you can get yourself a horse code by gifting 2 subscribers to the channel while I am live on Twitch, which we will be as of the posting of this video. With that being said, I very much appreciate all the support over the last week, and I'll see you on the next video.